Welcome to On the Brink, a fresh lens to take you and your business to new heights. Hi, I'm Andi Simon, your hostess, or your host, and I'm delighted to be here today to help you get off the brink. My job is to help you soar, not fall, but often you need to learn some things that might help you have a new perspective, have resilience, grit, something that's going to help you take care of yourself during fast changing times. And these are fast changing times. I talk often now about innovative thinking for fast changing times because we need to begin to adapt and be agile. What we always knew isn't going to get us to the future. And the future's uncertain, which makes us uncomfortable and tired. So I bring you some great people. And today I have Bill Sherman here with us, who I can't wait to introduce you to. As you listen to him, think about yourself. Are you a thought leader? Or are you just a good leader who thinks? Are you an influencer? What's the difference? Are you a good executive? What could make you a better thought leader? Do you run a company that needs thought leadership? Are you a person who's ready to rethink yourself, write your book, do your videos, begin to become a virtual keynote? What is it that a thought leader does and how could you do it? So, a little bit about Bill. Bill helps people take their ideas to scale through thought leadership. And I'll tell you more about that. He spent 20 years in the field working with world-class business thought leaders and Fortune 500 organizations. Thought leadership helps people see around corners. I often think that thought leaders have no corners. I mean, they're often I talk about you don't want to think out of the box, you want to create a new box. And it's that new sandbox that's waiting for us in different fashions. He is a CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and he helps clients who want to use thought leadership, whether to fill a sales pipeline or influence how people think and act. He's considered one of the world's leading voices in the area of organizational thought leadership. That is the people who create, curate, and deploy thought leadership to help their organization reaches its goal. And he hosts a weekly podcast, a fellow podcaster. It's titled Leveraging Thought Leadership, and he talks shop with the people who are doing it want to. Today, since you usually come to learn something new and change what you're doing or think about it, Bill's going to help you begin to see yourself through a fresh lens. Maybe you are that thought leader that we're waiting for, and it's time for you to think out loud. Bill, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Andi. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Tell the listeners about your own journey so those who are hearing you can visualize your story, and those who can see you can better enjoy the wisdom that you bring to them around thought leadership.
So, as you introduced me from my role today, I'm the COO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and I work with individuals and organizations. But if you had asked the 20-year-old version of myself where thought I would see myself being, I would have said probably wearing a tweed sport coat, elbow patches, teaching either English lit or theater at a 4-year university. And I figured that was my career path. And then in my late 20s, it shifted. Instead of completing the PhD program, I went out into the world of business. And so from there, I went into consulting, specifically around HR. First, working in the world of training and development, and then from there to strategic HR, and then management consulting, helping organizations getting right people to do the right thing at the right time. And as I said earlier, it's about taking ideas to scale. There's an idea that an executive has that they want to take into their organization so their employees see the world differently, or they want to reach their customers through a different perspective so that they can bring a vision of the future or just influence the zeitgeist of the world. That's my world. That's been my passion for 20 years.
It sounds like you have great purpose and you now have a platform on which to really elevate it and bring in people who are either new to being thought leaders or have done it for a while and need better program. I remember as you spoke that thought leaders have an idea, they're a person, and then they have a program. And this is all important for them to craft that messaging and get it out there. So as you're thinking out loud with our folks who are listening, let's start with the companies who need thought leadership or have them around and need to better understand how to leverage them. I'd like you to share with the listeners if you have a company now, do you have a thought leader? And if you don't, should you? And what could we do with them? Help us.
So there's And I think this is true for a lot of thought leadership, both on the individual side and in the organizational side. It's often a second or a third career. No one goes to college to say, oh, I'm going to go and work in the field of thought leadership. That might happen 20, 30 years from now. But as of today, everyone is in second or third career going into thought leadership. And with that, on the organizational level, it may be you have a CEO who has dabbled in thought leadership. They've written an article or two for Forbes or for a professional magazine, or they've spoken at a conference or two, or they've thought about or even written a book. They've done things, but they haven't aligned it with the strategy. Similarly, they may be looking, saying, how do I, as an executive, open doors for my organization that my sales team can't open on their own? And so thought leadership allows you to put an idea in front of a target audience. And you mentioned something that's really important about thought leadership is that definition of what is it? I've seen and heard a lot of wide-ranging definitions, from thought leadership is what thought leaders do, which is kind of circular and not very helpful, or thought leadership is your smartest content marketing. Instead, what I would say in terms of thought leadership is it's about taking an idea with stories and examples, data, and then finding a way to reach a specific target audience. So imagine, Andy, we're sitting down over coffee sometime, and you have a friend who has a problem, and they need a solution. My ideas may help them, but unless you understand what it is my ideas are, and you can communicate that to your friend, you're never going to say, oh, you should listen to Bill's podcast or you should read a blog. And the same, I can't do it for you. So we need an idea, we need content, we need a platform, and then we need offerings. We need to take our ideas out into the world and engage. And you can use thought leadership to help fill a sales pipeline. You can use it to continue a conversation when a sales conversation would be awkward and inappropriate, or you can use it to influence how people think and act.
Well, and when you do that, the power of it is that you're sharing a story that fills a need that someone has, and they didn't know you had answers for it. It's a way of thinking, it's storytelling, but it's influencing. There's something magical about it, because if you can share this in a way that's understandable and useful, somebody can solve problems that they didn't know they could do before. And they walk around, I can't tell you how many clients come, and they can't articulate what their unmet needs are, what their pain point is. They do all the go arounds. They're waiting for somebody to lead their thinking in some new directions. How interesting. So in today's new world with remote work and an unclear future with the economy, is thought leadership in great demand inside companies? What do you see happening?
Absolutely. So thought leadership has, if you look back maybe 10 years ago, thought leadership in an organization was limited to large professional services firms and IT consulting firms. And then over the last 3 years, and even accelerating the last 12 months, organizations outside of consulting and professional services have started standing up thought leadership firms or thought leadership functions within their organization. And that could be placed within marketing, it could be part of strategy, it could be part of executive communications, so that you're trying to figure out what are the ideas you're communicating. Now, with this last year, with COVID increasing, the challenge has been, it used to be you would get time, you would sponsor at a conference, you might get some podium time to talk about your idea or something. And then those events are now gone virtual. And so how do you use thought leadership? Because people are still consuming content. They're looking for ideas on how do they perform better? How do they help their organization in a tough time? There's a huge demand for content. You have to meet your audience. You have to know who your audience is first and foremost. And then you have to meet them with the content they're looking for. And it can't be just an overt sales pitch. You have to engage them and equip them with ideas, information, and knowledge.
Ideas, information, and knowledge. How interesting. I'm thinking as you're talking about how I typically have 25 or 30 speaking engagements a year. They're
Mhm.
all virtual now. I'm booking next year's all virtual. And I've changed the conversation from, it's often about blue ocean strategy or a culture change or change, but it's gone from ideas and abstraction to practical, tactical, and action, because I'm finding that the distance between a good idea and the need to take action on it has shrunk. And so many people aren't quite sure what's coming next. They don't have the certainty and they need some tools to rethink their approach to what they're doing. And I'm fascinated because I did it, but I didn't think about it. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm saying, is it sufficient? Scores are good. What's going on that could help them even further? It's pretty cool. Bill, I
So
guess,
let me jump in and add something to that for a moment.
sure.
So, one of the things that you think about is often you read articles for prescriptive action. Here's what an executive must do or a leadership team should consider, right? What we've seen over the last maybe 4 months is with COVID, instead of prescriptive, it's a lot more questions. Here are questions you should be considering.
Wow.
And it's much more conversational and an invitation rather than saying, we know all the answers. Because in a time of uncertainty, between the time you create the idea and the time you publish it, it may be dated.
Yes. Well, that's interesting observation as well, because, and I will give some good thought to the kind of approach to getting people tools to use. I can't teach them golf in 3 hours, but they're all looking for golf in 3 hours. I need to play a new game. I don't know how to play it. I got the club, I got the book. Please, how do I hit the ball? And you can't. But I got 3 hours to help them get going. And then they often turn into clients. But this is interesting from your observation. I like the questions to ask. How do we listen differently?
Mhm.
Are we listening with different ears? Are they listening with different ears? Listening is so important. But you led me into thinking about how do people listen now? What are they hearing?
So, in terms of thought leadership, the old model, and if you go back to the 1970s version of thought leadership, um, Tom Peters, for example, or Ken Blanchard, there was one way communication. You write a book, you speak from the podium, and you're delivering ideas and insight to an audience, and you hope they take them to action. What we're seeing now with the rise of social, for example, is the ability to engage in a community and a conversation.
Mm,
And it reduces the cycle time between listening and commenting, right? You can be reading other people's material, watching their videos, listening to their podcasts, and responding in real time. And part of thought leadership now, really in a social environment, is being willing to talk about content that's not just your own content.
mhm.
You have to come with a point of view and a perspective and add value to the conversation. But you have to listen and you have to realize you are part of a conversation. You can't be narcissistic and think you are the conversation.
But I'm also fascinated by what you're saying because you're reflecting a change in relationships, in part because of the media, but also in the way in which ideas, which is thought leadership, are now being shared, not owned, but collaboratively thinking through some interesting things. It's a very different approach to it. Now, for the other side, what if our listeners are thinking that maybe they should be a thought leader, or they are a thought leader, or maybe they want to be a thought leader? Is this a role that they can emerge into today? And how would you tell them how to do that?
So I would encourage people to think about thought leadership. It is one of the differentiators for an individual or an organization, which is enduring for a couple of reasons. One, you develop a reputation of being that person who is forward thinking, and that's valuable career wise. Secondly, if you're anticipating the needs of a client or a customer, then and they listen to you and they say, oh, you said this was going to be an issue a year ago, and now I need that problem, they're going to come back to you and they're going to say, you're thinking ahead a year, 2 years into the future, and you're anticipating my needs. You're building relationships on an entirely different level. Part of what I would say in terms of starting out on the journey, couple of things. First thing, find your lane. Instead of trying to be all things to all people, figure out what you're going to talk about. We think about in social media, at least content marketing, talks a lot about broadcasting. How many downloads, how many likes did you get? And it's entirely possible to become obsessed with that top line number. Instead, find an audience that you want to reach, that you have something meaningful to say to them. And it's okay to narrowcast. Your target audience may only be 200 people in the entire world. But if they're the right 200 people, it can be transformative for you. And I'll give you an example. So if you put out a piece of thought leadership content and someone in your target audience says, wow, that sounds like you were sitting in the office with me and we were having a conversation and you were talking about what's going on exactly in my world, then you've got relevancy. And so I'll give you an example. If you focus and you say, my thought leadership is around the field of leadership, for example, well, there's hundreds and hundreds of people talking about leadership. You've got to narrow that down, whether it's to a more specific audience or an industry or a certain person at a point in their career. You've got to narrowcast. And then you've got to have something new and valuable to say. And for something new, it can be a truly new idea. That's possible. It's infrequent. Most ideas are actually welded. You take an idea that, people have been talking about before, and you add a little bit to the conversation. And then the third option is you take something that's very common and familiar for you, and you take it to a new audience. So that could be talking about agile software techniques to theater people, or theater techniques to agile software folks, okay? And how you become that bridge in thought leadership is incredibly relevant.
I love it. So there are lots of ways that you can actually get into this.
Mm-hmm.
For many people, it may be a whole new way of beginning to think about themselves, what they want to do. And the platforms that are available now make it quite easy to begin to do it. You don't need to be invited to that keynote. You need to find a community of people who you can begin to share ideas, who will tell other people about it, who say they bring a perspective looking into the future in fashions that are unfamiliar to us. Does this make sense? That's the gist of what we're doing. And whether it's a book that you write, or it's videos that you produce, or it's a how-to ebook that you've created, I mean, there are all kinds of not very complicated ways, books are complicated, of getting that message going. But it is not sufficient. It's important to establish, but not sufficient to monetize and create the kind of value you're really looking for. It's a time of sharing.
So I'll give you an example from the head of thought leadership at a very large financial institution, one of the large banks in the US. And he calls what he works on snackable bites. Yes, they do the white papers, they do the research, but he's always looking to determine, how can I break that down into something that either is a single graphic or a short podcast, or it may be just a post on LinkedIn. And so if you're starting into thought leadership, a book can feel daunting. A white paper can be daunting. Whereas go on LinkedIn. It's free to create an account, post something, and see how people respond. Start building your network, start engaging with people, follow hashtags of where are conversations happening, and comment. One of the things that you can do very effectively is find people who are already posting on the topic that you care about, comment on that, engage in dialogue. You'll get seen more that way. And then you can take a good comment that you've written, something more than, yeah, I like this, or I disagree. But if you write a thoughtful paragraph, copy that, put it into a document, and then refine it. And guess what? You've taken a comment and you've grown it into your own post. And some of it is repetition, relevancy, and consistency. Find a lane that you're going to talk about, start reaching to people in your audience and having a conversation, engaging with them. And it's very possible that if you do that on a regular basis within 90 to 120 days, you'll have people who respect you for what you have to say and will be listening.
Well, it's interesting listening to you, and I am hoping our listeners are as well, because you just set forth a change your strategy that could be done by virtually anybody. LinkedIn has opened up a tremendous opportunity in ways that might have been more unfamiliar in the past, but are very comfortable now. And if you're not taking advantage of what it's offering, go for it. It's different than Instagram, it's different than Twitter. It offers business to business, people to people ways of building your reputation around what you are knowledgeable in and interested in. This is so cool. So let me ask you, Bill, we're just about ready to wrap us up. Are there two or three things that you want the listeners to remember, regardless of whether they're an institution or organization that needs thought leadership or an individual who wants to become one? Some things that are memorable because they often remember the end better than the beginning, even.
So the first recommendation is the one that you shouldn't wait to start. It is the recommendation that is, what is it? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
I love
If
that.
if folks do anything, don't use the excuse of, oh, my idea isn't perfect, it isn't polished. Get out there, put it out, engage with people. Don't have content insecurity where you're afraid to post and to engage, because that content insecurity will make it be another 20 years before you post. So that's the first thing. Get out there and do it. The second thing is find a topic that you're passionate about, okay? And tie it to something that will be meaningful for you in terms of success. Now, for most people, that's tied to success on the business level. And so figure out who you want to reach, why you want to reach them, what you want to share. And if you do reach them, what's the so what? Thought leadership shouldn't just be a conversation and the glory days of undergraduate where you sat down in the student union and you just chatted with your friends for hours on end. How are you going to be relevant to them? How are you going to change what they do and what they act on? And then how will that help you achieve your goals? And so be thoughtful and be proactive, and don't assume the world is waiting to come to you. You've got to go meet it.
You know, I did a podcast with another individual, and they said, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be authentic.
Absolutely.
And that means that there's lots of room for the gaps to be filled by people like yourselves. And you're gap fillers. I often say to people, I'm a gap filler. What are you doing really well now you don't need me for? What can you figure out? That's the pain point. I'd love to figure it out with you. And usually it's with you because, quite frankly, unless somebody discovers it themselves, it becomes the consultants or the
Mhm.
thought leaders. And so I'm a big believer that my job is to enable you to discover what you already should know in a fashion. I'll begin to surprise you with all kinds of things to read or listen or whatever. But the idea is for you to have that epiphany. And if you do, then your mind goes swish, 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 and off it goes in ways that I could never even imagine. I can help steer, and I can keep funding it or feeding it. But it isn't the consultant or the thought leader that owns it all. It's how they help you come through a process of discovering new things that you need for now. And is that something that you share?
Absolutely. So I'm a strong believer in the concept of co-creation, right? And that isn't that you come in with the answer on a silver tray and saying, I have all the answers, but saying, okay, you've got a real pain point. Let's figure it out. And thought leadership is a set of tools. You may have a wrench when they need a hammer, right? And you have to recognize that your thought leadership may not solve everyone's problem just because you're passionate about it. But for the people that you can be relevant to, you're going to learn a lot by engaging with them, understanding what they're trying to solve, and saying, let's roll up our sleeves together and let's get this solved.
I love it. Now, if they want to reach you, Bill, where is the best place to get a hold of you?
So I'm available, as you said, my firm is Thought Leadership Leverage, and you can find us at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. I am on LinkedIn. And also, I do the podcast that you mentioned on leveraging thought leadership, where we talk to folks who are doing exactly this. So if you're curious on what is thought leadership, We talk with people who are at the start of their game trying to figure out thought leadership, as well as those who are, world renowned as thought leaders.
Well, I think that's really exciting. So, if you are new to understanding what thought leadership is, we've got a resource here to help you. And if you've been around a while and want to take it to the next stage, I think Bill would help you with that as well. And I love the idea that it isn't about getting the book done, it's about giving people a program that they could actually use the wisdom in a way to be transformative. So, it's how do you multiply the knowledge you have, the ideas that you bring, the thoughts that you've been developing? And take it and really make a multiplier out of it. So it's been fun. Let me wrap. For those of you who come every week to listen to all of our podcasts, I can't thank you enough. You send me great emails, info@andysimon.com or info@simonassociates.net. Come right to us. And I am going to push out our book, Rethink, Smashing the Myths of Women in Business. Smashing the Myths of Women in Business is available for pre-orders now. And it's going to be out in January, but Amazon loves pre-orders, Barnes and Noble, and it's a really interesting book about women and how they have broken through all of those no you can'ts. Women don't, only to find that of course they can, and they are transforming our society today. So join with me in celebrating their lives as we begin to help others do the same. My book, On the Brink, A Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights, is on Amazon. Even the audibles there that I did myself. Thanks for joining us. I love your emails. Please stay well and happy. Bye bye.